Well, hello everyone. I'm KJAM News Director Sue Bergheim, and joining me today is District 8 House candidate Scott Parsley. Scott, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Sue, for having me.
We'd like to start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and about why you decided to run for the House seat for District 8.
Sure, Sue. Well, as Sue said, my name is Scott Parsley. I've lived in Madison for about 30 years. My wife and I have raised our 3 kids here. Our oldest son is 26. He now works for Iowa State University down in Ames. Our oldest daughter is 23, and she lives in Pierre. And our youngest daughter is a senior in high school this year, so we're very busy with her activities in school. I work at East River Electric. I've worked at East River for 27 years. Why I'm running, as I look at the direction that we're heading in some of what I think are key issues for the state, education, care for our elderly, care for those who have some needs, special needs, folks like folks at ECHO. I'm concerned about how the budget process for those programs is dwindling. The priority that we're using in the state for where we're putting our funds. I believe that we need to look at a reprioritization and have a greater investment in education and support for those in our state who have for a long time worked and made this state what it is, and now as in their later years, as they need some support for their nursing care and those types of things, we seem to be stepping away from some of those things, and I'm concerned about that. I also am very interested in moving the state forward economically in terms of economic development. I've spent my career working in economic development. Programs like the ethanol industry, the wind industry in South Dakota. I've been very involved in those things, and I'm very interested in continuing support for that from the state. I think that support needs to be balanced, though, with the investment we're willing to make in education and those infrastructure in the state. So that's primarily why I'm running, Sue, because I am very interested in the future of the state and serving the people of District 8.
Okay, well, one of the things you talked about already, we'll touch on a little bit more, K through 12 education. Obviously, it becomes an issue or becomes something that the legislature talks about each session in one way or another. And with this past year's passage of House Bill 1234, now that being the referred law 16 on the November ballot. Now, what are your thoughts on the state of K through 12 education in South Dakota?
Well, I'm concerned about the direction that we're heading. In the last 10 years, we've reduced our support for education over 10% in South Dakota, and that doesn't include the $50 million that was reduced in 2011 when there was an 8% cut to our support for K-12 education. We have both a constitutional and a human responsibility to provide an education for our youth. We were provided a very solid education. I was in South Dakota. I graduated from Brookings High School, and I believe that we need to continue that. I come from a family with a lot of educators in it, and my wife is an educator, and I've not ever met an educator who went into that business to become rich. They do this because they have a calling to be educators. My grandma always said that teachers and nurses are not made, they're born, and I believe that. And I think we need to show them the respect. We need to show them our interest in what they do, the sacrifice they're willing to make, both financially, time. My wife spends a lot of our own personal dollars on supplies for her classroom, and I know many, many teachers who do that. Those are not people who are doing that because they don't believe in their profession. Now we need to believe in them and support them.
Now, with that, with Referred Law 16 on the ballot, if that is defeated by the voters in November here, now, what do you think needs to be done then at that point if you're elected to serve starting in 2013?
Well, the first thing we need to do is begin to restore what was cut. Last year we didn't restore anything. We kind of wasted our time on talking about whether teachers should have tenure, what teachers should get a bonus and what teachers shouldn't get a bonus, when we don't even have a good base for what we're supporting our education system with today. So we need to get that base. We need to begin to rebuild that base of funding for education in the state. There is a 1-cent sales tax on the ballot as well, which, if passed, would certainly help build that base for funding for education. It's interesting. There was an article in the newspaper yesterday that I read that a representative from Sioux Falls, who happens to be a Republican, was quoted as saying that once 1, 2, 3, 4 passed the House, he walked off the floor and the first person he saw was the governor, and he said, "Well, you got your bill, but it's a bad bill." And that's his quote, not mine. That's his quote. And I just read that and I thought, that bill passed by one vote in the House, and he gave it his vote even though he thought it was a bad bill. It seems to me there needs to be a different voice than that. If it's a bad piece of legislation, we should be willing to stand up and say it's a bad piece of legislation, try and make it better, and if we can't, then we'll kill that and we'll move on to something that is better. But it just seems a contradiction to me to vote yes on a bill that is a bad piece of legislation. The other part of 1, 2, 3, 4 that is kind of a contradiction is this notion of tenure. Again, I'm married to an educator, and she was an administrator, and so she's had a lot of involvement with teacher contracts on both offering them and receiving them. And we really don't have tenure at the K-12 level in South Dakota. Now, the university level is a different story, but 1, 2, 3, 4 didn't address university tenure. What we have is continuing contracts, and what that means is that the schools are required to offer or notify teachers by a time certain if they're not going to offer them a contract, giving the teacher then the opportunity to appeal that decision to the school board if they so choose. But it's like any other place of employment. If there's documentation that the person isn't doing the job, you don't have to offer them a contract. So this whole notion that that you can never fire a teacher is just not true.
Okay, moving on, and you touched a little bit on it there, just the fact of just voting with a party or being with the party, just even if something isn't going well. There was a little bit of that, and that was proof right there of what you said. But there was a little bit more, of disconcern, I guess, between the parties, amongst the parties. There always is a little bit, but this session, some of it was made public a little bit more. If you're elected, what would you do to maybe try to avoid some of that and kind of bring things back to just speaking and representing the constituents that voted you in?
Certainly. My goal would be to, first of all, represent the constituents of District 8, but also represent the state of South Dakota. I mean, we are part of a larger community, which is the state, and we need to look at what's best for the state. Certainly, we're going to have disagreements on what we think is best. That's why we have two parties. Probably one of the problems we've had in Pierre, and again, from a newspaper article over the weekend, the House Majority Leader said that when the Republicans won a supermajority in the last election, he feared that there may be dissension within their party, which I understand that, according to that article, anyhow, there may be. I think it's always important that we have a voice from both sides of the issue. And currently in Pierre, with supermajority, the voice of one party does not get heard. We need to have more of a balance so that we do have a healthy discussion. If we don't have a balance, there's never a reason to have a healthy discussion. And then things like people voting for bills, even though they know they're bad bills, happens. Okay.
Moving to kind of a local issue, but an eastern South Dakota issue more so than any, is the issue of drainage. I know within some of the counties here within District 8, they've dealt with it on the local level. What do you think the state's involvement should be in drainage issues?
Well, it is an issue. I mean, some of the counties have become so frustrated with drainage, they've just done away with all their ordinances and said, we're going to let the courts decide this, and that's not the right answer. From the state's perspective, I think that the state needs to not necessarily look at enacting new laws on drainage, but somehow work with the counties so that we have consistency in draining ordinances, because water doesn't stop at a county line. It does move across county lines. So if you have one set of ordinances in one county and another set in a neighboring county, it can become quite distracting in terms of how that ordinance is going to be applied. So I think the state needs to sit down with the counties, and they need to talk to them and encourage them to begin to draft model or similar drainage ordinances. I know Yankton County is just now acting right now as we speak on drainage ordinances down there in their county, and they've not had them before. I think Brown County did away with their ordinances and said let the courts decide it. So we need to have some more uniformity in that. I don't know that the state it's a good place to dictate what those ordinances are, because locally people here know drainage patterns, they know the historic water flows and those types of things, so that they can deal with this much better than somebody in Pierre can deal with it who isn't familiar with the area. So I think we need to support and encourage the counties to be uniform, but the state probably doesn't have a strict role in passing laws that would dictate how drainage is handled in each area.
Okay. And now, as you've been out and talking with people up and down, or I guess side to side in District 8 as we run, as you've been visiting with people, what are some issues that they're bringing to you that they would like to see addressed if you're elected to go to Pierre?
The education issue has been one that has probably been the most prevalent. I'm not finding a lot of support for what 1, 2, 3, 4 would offer. People are feeling like teachers are becoming kind of the favorite doll to get thrown around in some of these legislative issues. Also, surprisingly, and I probably am more surprised at the age of people who are approaching me about this, people my age or older, texting. There is a great concern out there about texting and driving and the problems that that's causing. Support for Medicare, Medicaid is always an issue. Economic development is always an issue. We're very fortunate in this part of the country that while we had felt some of the economic downturn, agriculture is strong, so it hasn't affected us quite as much, although we certainly saw things at Gale and places like that in the community that were affected by the economic downturn. We need to continue to work on getting those issues solved and keeping people employed.
Okay. Anything that you would like to close with to tell the voters of District 8?
Well, I would ask for your support and in my candidacy, and ask for your vote on November 6th. You know, we have a great state. South Dakota is a great state. But we have some issues that we need to address, education being one of those, support for our elderly and those who have needs in social service areas. We need to support those people. We need to also continue a strong economic development program, but not at the expense of those programs. We need to balance that. We have, very fortunately, we have resources in this state. We have 3 large trust funds that provide resources. We have now several reserve funds, and that's going to be enhanced again this year by a $52 million surplus. It's curious the way we budget. We seem to budget high in expenses and low in revenues, and then when we find that that's not the way the world really worked, we have all this extra money and we say what a great job we did. You know, there's 2 ways to look at that as well. You know, we carry, besides those funds, besides the trust funds and the reserve funds, which are approaching $1.5 to $2 billion, we always carry about a $850 million to $1 billion balance in our state checkbook. So we have a lot of resources in South Dakota. My goal, my interest is in looking at the priority and how we use those resources. I'm very much a pro-education candidate, and I believe that that's the basis for solid economic development in the state, is to have a good, educated, and trained workforce. And it also helps to keep our population in our prisons down. The more we educate people, every study that I've ever read says if you don't educate people, you're going to incarcerate them. And I'd much rather educate people than put them in jail. Mm-hmm. So those are my interests. And again, I would ask the voters of District 8 for their vote on November 6th.
All right, Scott, thank you very much for being with us. Scott Parsley, candidate for District 8 House of Representatives. And, of course, we want to encourage everyone to get out and vote the election on November 6th. And if you're not able to make it there on November 6th, be sure to do some early voting, absentee voting. Check with your local county auditor's office. So thank you, Scott, for being with us today.
Thank you, Sue.